Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here, bringing you a quick video kind of with my reaction and review of the first episode of Star Trek Lower Decks, Second Contact. So Second Contact was written by Mike McMahon, the creator of Star Trek Lower Decks, and you may know him as one of the writers from Rick and Morty and one of the co-creators of Solar Opposites. So no stranger to comedic animated shows and that sort of thing. So how does that translate over into the Star Trek universe though? So first of all, I'm going to make the first part of this video spoiler free, and I'll give you a good spoiler warning when I'm going to get into the spoiler elements of the show. So first of all, I have to say, I did really enjoy this. I thought it was a lot of fun. I think from the previews I was expecting wall-to-wall humor and jokes, but there was there was certainly a lot of jokes in the episode and a lot of humor on display here. Humor, of course, is very subjective. This is not going to work for everybody. It mostly worked for me. I kind of enjoyed the humor in this, but I also enjoyed the general feeling of Star Trekkiness of the show, if that makes sense. There's a real feeling of kind of evoking that TNG era Star Trek that we're all kind of familiar with. And the USS Cerritos does feel like a ship of the line in that era. The day before this premiered, I watched the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Lower Decks just to kind of get a bit of memory of the inspiration for this show, I guess. And, there's a lot of parallels here. The four ensigns that are featured here, there were four ensigns featured in Lower Decks. And that kind of camaraderie, them kind of living their lives while the big adventures happen around them, I think was an interesting element. The opening credits I did enjoy. There's some really good sight gags in there that I'll get into on the other side of the spoiler warning. And the characters, these characters aren't what you expect based on the trailers, I think. There's a lot of heart in this and a lot of really interesting aspects to these people that doesn't come across in the trailers. So, if you watched the trailers and that turned you off, give it a try. You may not like it, but you may love it. So, I think it's definitely worth checking out. The other thing I want to say before I sound the spoiler horn is another YouTuber, Ketwalski, had the chance to see the first two episodes at the premiere earlier this week. And he said that if the first episode didn't really do it for you, give it a chance to the end of the second episode. And as good as he and I both think the first episode was, he says the second episode is even better. So give it a fair shake. Don't dismiss this. I definitely think it is worth checking out. So here we go. Spoiler warning. From here on in, I'm going to be spoiling this episode. So we get a close look at the Cerritos' mission of Second Contact. And it's kind of what I was theorizing earlier. They come in after the big guys do the first contact, whether that's the Enterprise or some other ship. And they kind of do the logistics. In this case, they're on this planet setting up a subspace array so the planet can contact and communicate with the Federation. And we get to see the role that the senior officers play, as well as the junior lower decks officers. Now, one thing that I like about this, and that Mike McMahon has talked about in interviews, is that the senior officers feel like it's their show. They're the most important people on the ship. But of course, the show isn't about them. It's about the lower deck officers. And I really like that dynamic. There's a couple scenes, for example, where you see Boimler and Mariner in the background, but, the captain is front and center trying to steal the spotlight, sort of. And almost even doing a little bit of that overly dramatic, almost Kirk type voice where she's like, "Doctor, you have to tell me, how can we fix this," or whatever. I just love little things like that, these little nods. Speaking of little nods, this episode is full of them, and I will of course be doing a complete breakdown of all of the Easter eggs and canon connections that I was able to find. Look for that over the next few days. But yeah, this episode was just a lot of fun, and I think a good introduction to these characters. Mariner is irresponsible and a troubled person. I would say not as much as maybe the trailers would lead you to believe. However, she has captured the notice of the captain. And early on, you kind of question, why is the captain taking such an interest in this particular ensign, as opposed to, Boimler, whose name she can't even remember. But there's a great reveal, and I do love how the reveal is done when we find out towards the end of the episode that Mariner is actually Captain Freeman's daughter. And we also get to meet her husband, Mariner's father. And it's an interesting dynamic, and really kind of it's interesting how they set it up and then pay it off with that revelation later. So I thought that was really interesting. I do also really like Rutherford and Tendi, the other two officers. Rutherford in particular has a great story through this where he's kind of on a date with another Lower Decks officer, and this date kind of continues throughout the entire episode, and all of the crazy, wacky happenings are going on in the background. There's this virus that's been brought aboard, or some sort of infection that's causing crew members to act like zombies and attack each other. And that's kind of happening in the background, and these two ensigns are on this date and interacting, and they're going about their duties. They're doing what they're told to do, but they're still just acting like it's completely normal. And we do get a line towards the end where, Rutherford says, "Oh, this sort of thing happens all the time." So, I love that as a little bit of a Trek trope that, all these crazy things, they seem to happen almost on a weekly basis. So, that's kind of funny. Tendi, I really liked her perspective as the newcomer to the ship. We kind of get the introduction of what's going on through her eyes. Boimler and Mariner have served together on the ship for a year now, but Tendi is the newcomer. And so you get kind of the tour of the ship with her. You get introductions to a lot of the Trek ideas. I feel like if you've never seen Star Trek before, this is a great episode to kind of come in on, because it does kind of guide you through the basic, tropes of Star Trek and how everything works. So, kudos to them for that, for making this not just something that all the diehard fans are going to love. It's something that could really be someone's gateway into Star Trek as well. And I mean, the more Star Trek fans, the better. So, bring them in. That's awesome. If this captures someone's imagination, maybe they'll go and watch all the other things that Star Trek has to offer and become a diehard fan. So yeah, kudos to them for that. I love that the virus sickness story kind of is just in the background, and that the main stories definitely are the Boimler Mariner thing. They have this whole thing where they're down on the planet, and Mariner is delivering farm equipment to these farmers, kind of in contravention of Starfleet regulations. She thinks it's unfair that they don't have access to this equipment, and she provides it. And we find out later that she had actually been on the planet for the first contact on a different ship, so she kind of knows the ins and outs of what's going on, and what she's doing may not be exactly right, but she feels she's doing it for the right reasons. Boimler, meanwhile, has been tasked with keeping an eye on her by the captain. Again, we find out later why that is. And Boimler as a character, I'm really enjoying. I think Jack Quaid does a great job with this character. He's a little bit bumbling, but not to the extent that, again, from the trailer, I would have thought. He's a very by-the-books officer. He's nervous. He wants to be promoted, but he's very much a model Starfleet officer, follows the regulations, and is very much a, straight arrow in that respect. So I feel like the arc for this season for Boimler and Mariner are going to be a kind of meet in the middle type thing, where she's going to have her rough edges kind of smoothed over by Boimler and become a bit more of a model Starfleet officer. Whereas Boimler is going to have a little bit more of that lust for adventure and excitement, kind of have that creep into his character from the influence of Mariner. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for these characters. I think it's going to do some really interesting things. And I really can't wait to see where it all goes. The opening credits sequence, like I mentioned at the start, I really enjoy. They use the same font as the TNG credits, which, would have been nice to see something a little bit different, but I do like that they're paying homage to The Next Generation. It's obvious that Mike McMahon is the biggest fan of TNG. He did the TNG Season 8 Twitter account and book, of course. The opening credits, my favorite bit is the Cerritos encountering the Romulans engaging the Borg, and they're, you know, nearby, and then they get the Borg fire at them and they just nope right out of there. I just thought that was a great little sequence. So all in all, I think Lower Decks is not, you know, an amazing, huge piece of cinematic history that's going to shake the foundations of the world or anything like that. But it's definitely an exciting and interesting entry into the Star Trek saga, and I highly encourage you to check it out. Again, the humor is subjective. It's not going to be for everyone, but I see a lot of potential in this show, and I think it could go some really interesting places. So how about you? Have you checked out Lower Decks yet? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you, of course, to the Patreon supporters for your help in bringing this video to you. And to everyone else, thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Now, if you stuck around in the video this long, I have a bit of a surprise for you. We're going to bring back the Unready Room. That's the live show where we talk about episodes of Star Trek. And of course, we are going to be talking about this episode of Lower Decks, Second Contact, at our usual time on Friday evening at that would be 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. So check out this channel. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already so you can see when we go live. I will be joined by Brandy Jackala to talk about that episode. So we hope to see you all there. Thank you all again so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. And until then, as always, live long and prosper.